Okay, so this is going to be a video on our notes and on how to graph linear equations. So step 1 says check to make sure that your equation is in this form, y equals mx plus b, which we also call slope intercept form, because the m right here stands for the slope and the b value on the end stands for the y-intercept. So if our equation is in this form, then we can easily identify the slope and the y-intercept, the two pieces that we're going to need in order to graph a linear equation. So step 2 says we'll then identify the slope, rise over run, and the y-intercept. So let's look at our example here. Y equals 3/5 x minus 3. Well, we can clearly see that it is in this form, y equals mx plus b. And we can see that y is isolated on one side of the equal sign. So that's the clue that it is in slope-intercept form. And so therefore we just have to look at the value in front of x, the coefficient of x, and that's the slope. So our slope is 3/5. And then we look at this value on the end, and that's our b value, which is -3, and that's the y-intercept. So then step number 3 says plot the y-intercept, and remember that this point is going to be on the y-axis. So for us, our y-intercept is -3. So we start at the origin, and because it's negative, we go down to 1, 2, 3, -3. And so y-intercepts, we need to remember that those points can also, we can write that as an ordered pair. And so anytime we have a value on the y-axis, the x value there is 0, and there's our y value. So we can take any y-intercept and we can write it as a number, -3, or we could write it as the ordered pair, 0, comma, whatever that value is. So your x value is always going to be 0 for a y-intercept. Now step number 4 says start at that y-intercept that we just plotted and apply the slope, the rise over run. So we see that our slope is 3/5. Well, that's our rise over our run. So we start at the y-intercept, that's one point, and we're needing a second point, right? Because if we're going to graph a line, we need 2 points so that we can connect those 2 points to see where the line would be on the graph. So that's the purpose of applying the slope next, because we can start with this point, the y-intercept, and we can find our second point by using the slope, the rise over run. So from this y-intercept, we're going to rise 3, 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to run 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I rise up and run to the right because this is a positive slope. So then the next thing I need to do is just connect those points with a solid line. This is step number 5, and it says extend it all the way to the edge of the graph and put arrows on the end. So that's saying us that our line is going to keep going in both directions. That's the purpose of the arrows. And then we've just graphed a linear equation. So the thing to remember is that if your slope is a positive slope, such as the one we had above, you rise up and you always run right. But maybe our slope is negative. So if you're going to graph one, you can follow the same steps, negative slope. And we could rise up and run left, or you could rise down. So instead of rising up, you could go down and still run right. So you only have to change one of those directions when you're plotting a negative slope. But if you change both of them, you'll see you're going to end up with a positive slope. So just change one direction. You can either still rise up and run left if it's a negative slope, or you could go down first and still run right, and that would give you a negative slope. So those are important points to realize. Now the second thing you need to realize is that your equation is not in y equals mx plus b form. This one was. Then you need to solve it first to identify the slope and the y-intercept. So, for example, maybe we had an equation that looked like this. 2x minus 3y equals 6. And I want to graph this, let's say, for example. Well, step number 1 is check to make sure it's in y equals mx plus b form. Well, this one is not. So in order to graph this one, I need to put it in that form, which means I'm going to have to solve for y. I'm going to have to isolate the y on one side so that it is in that form. So in order to do that, I need to move this x term to the other side of the equation. So I'm going to need to subtract that term on both sides. So I'm left with negative 3y equals, now 6 and negative 2x are not like terms. So I'm just going to write them down. I'm just going to tack that term on the end there because I can't combine these two terms. They're not like terms. Now in order to isolate y fully, I need to divide everything by whatever is in front of y. So that cancels out and I'm left with y equals 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2, and a negative divided by a negative is a positive, and that's 2/3, and then my x can slide over to the side. So now I have put this equation in y equals, here's my mx plus b form. As long as y is isolated, then we can look at the coefficient, the value in front of x, and that would be our slope. And our y-intercept, the b value here, is the other piece, negative 2. So now I could take these values and I could graph them. I could plot the y-intercept, and then I could rise and run from there with my slope to find my second point, connect the dots, draw my line, and plot a linear equation.